Welcome to the Bright Room podcast. We interview founders, thought leaders, and everyday pirates to discover new approaches to old problems for a brighter tomorrow.
The knowledge or the urgency to act was there. So everybody said especially to the owners or to the founders, people on the work floor said you have to act because of the radical transparency. Everybody knew how much cash we had, and they just saw, okay, the cash is going out of the company. You have to react. You have to lower the cost, and in a dramatic way. So there were people who said, okay, you have to act. Although I know that probably I will be laid off. Perhaps something about the purpose. We wanted to change the financial sector because the financial sector plays a very dominant role in our societies, and we think that on the one hand, the financial sector can play a very positive role by enabling people to invest, companies, for instance, or buy houses or do investments, etc. But on the other hand, there's a lot of stuff going on in the financial sector, which is from a, let's say, societal point of view is not so sustainable. And we want to change that. The third thing, how did we, let's say, establish or start this company? That was more or less by accident. Because we used to work for a German company, a big German financial planner. And then this company decided to close down the subsidiary in the Netherlands. And then we were unemployed, didn't know what to do. And we just decided, shall we just continue what we have done before? And then we started the company. So it's not a situation that we always wanted to build this company. No, we just work somewhere, we're laid off, and then perhaps we have an entrepreneurial spirit, which enabled us to build a company, but it was more or less by accident.
Okay, so it was a blessing in disguise, I guess.
Yeah, afterwards, but let's say at the moment you're laid off, you are totally pissed, and let's say from a perspective, I mean, that is 12 years ago. We were lucky at that time that we were all young enough. We didn't have children. We had partners who wanted to support us. If this would have happened 5 or 10 years later, there wouldn't be any Viisi, because then everybody would have just searched for another job and just continued, and then we would have gone in different directions.
Okay. And in terms of organizational structure, how would you describe it, or do you name it in any particular way?
Yeah, that's. I mean, there's a lot of stuff written on our organizational model. Probably you'll find presentations or articles. We are an example of so-called self-organizational structures, or holacracy. And that means that you have a decentralized decision making. So you give as much autonomy as possible to people who do the work. And to give just one practical example, the teams decide themselves if they hire new colleagues, as an example. Mm-hmm. And they decide selber how they do the work. And the idea is that the one who does actually the work knows much better what is the right decision. And that also means, for instance, for the mortgage advice, I mean, you have rules and regulation, etc., financial regulation, but we believe and think that the advisor knows what the best is for his or her client, and will search for the best solution by just asking the question, when I would be my client, what would I expect? What advice would I like to have from my advisor? And that works pretty well.
Yeah, I think I either read or maybe saw in some of the interviews that you transitioned beyond holacracy at some point. So it was you started with holacracy, but then it evolved into something else. So where is it? Where is it now?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I mean, holacracy has become very known, but that's not an holacracy. It's Brian. How is he called? Brian, who wrote this book. But it's, let's
Robertson,
say, yeah, Robertson. But it comes from the Netherlands actually. So it's called sociocracy, and but let's say if you talk on a rather, I wouldn't say superficial way, you talk about holacracy because everybody uses the IT infrastructure of holacracy, Glassrock software. By the way, which if you Google Viisi, Glassrock or holacracy, you find our organizational structure. Everybody can also watch into this structure. But we call it beyond holacracy because we are not we build our own model, which on the one hand is this holacracy more technical infrastructure, but we have not such a strong focus on top-down lead link. It's called lead link. It's a kind of manager role, I would say, and we have more rotation principle. And we are have a bigger focus on the teams themselves. So the team themselves, I think it's a very practical example. You have a credit department. 4 people work in a credit department, and those 4 people, they rotate, and having a kind of project ownership or this coordinational role of this team of 4 people rotates every half a year. That's not the hierarchical, horizontal way of saying the lead link of the whole organization decides who is the best lead link of this credit team. No, the credit team on the one hand decides, okay, who is going to do next, but it's like let's say cycling together. So you cycle up the mountain, and then one by one you cycle in front of your 3 colleagues, and then in the end you try to reach the mountain together as a team of 4 people. And depending on the situation, and that also can be, for instance, how much stress do you have at home, or have you just gotten a new child, or do you have a lot of stress with your parents because they have to, I don't know, they're sick or something like that, then the team themselves decides, okay, Irina, would you like to do the next half year and take the lead? But there is also no difference in salary. So this whole idea of doing stuff together and rotate is, to my point of view, a very healthy one, and is also not new. So if you dive into history, and then you can dive into anthropology, but you can also dive, for instance, in our Western European history. If you take, for instance, Greece, Polis Athens, 2,500 years ago, they also rotated, and it's called primus inter pares. So first among equals. So everybody's equal, but one has a kind of responsibility for a certain amount of time, and then you do rotation. Mm-hmm. And the healthy thing about this is if everybody has to take this responsibility for a certain point or for a certain time, then the acceptance of each other taking this role is much higher, because you are not the one who says, our manager I wouldn't have chosen him, etc. Because it's always very different if you also have the responsibility to do this for a certain period of time, because then you just notice, or you find out, that a lot of things are different if you have to do them yourself. It's always very simple and easy to be just standing next to the soccer field and saying, no, you should have done in this way or in that way. There's a Dutch saying which says the best shipmen are standing on land and not on the ship themselves, and then they tell the others how you should let's say take care of a ship, but it's different if you have to do it yourself. So I think it's a very healthy combination, because the feedback you give to each other is a profound but also correct feedback in a sense that you don't exaggerate your criticism on certain topics. So you try to keep it in a decent solution-focused way, because you're together. Your team is at the center of things.
Mm-hmm. So everybody can walk in the shoes of the other person at some point.
Yeah, and also discuss. So it also can be that, let's say, somebody says for a certain point, I have done this, I don't know, a few months, but something happens in my setting that I ask, let's say, for instance, somebody who is more experienced to take over for a certain moment. So, for instance, we had a times of crisis between October and March, and then we had to do layoffs. And then they said, okay, Tom, you have done this before. You're 10 years older. It's probably something which also fits to your experience. Could you please take over for this period of time? And I did it half a year. And then let's say after the turnaround was finished, and we had to lower our cost by half. So we laid off half of our people. And then it was finished, and we were cash flow positive again in February. And then in March, I said, okay, it's fine. I've done the first quarter, and then my colleague Hendrik took over. And it's also nice if you have done something for a certain point. It's like this idea of cycling together. You're
Mhm.
cycling up to the mountain, and then you are just happy that for a next, I don't know, few kilometers, you can just go in the second, third, and fourth position, and then just cycle after those colleagues who are let's say taking you out of the wind, so to say.
Yeah, yeah. And the situation with layoffs, I mean, I think I also saw it or read it somewhere, but I'm just going to repeat it so it's also here, and you can confirm if what I understood is correct or not. But the people just decided themselves who would leave because they had the transparency into the financial situation of the company. Is this what happened?
No, no. There was a kind of team chosen, and they took the responsibility. So what is interesting from an organizational point of view or leadership point of view is that in the recruiting or the hiring is done in a decentralized way. And I thought when we would lay off that we also could do this in a decentralized way, but that doesn't work. So because there is this kind of peer culture, people are very close to each other, and then they say, okay, let's choose people who decide on this together. It's a little bit like, because in the beginning I thought, why doesn't this work in a decentralized way? Why could teams just not decide together on this topic? But then I thought it's a little bit comparable with if you have in society a kind of discussion going on between two parties, can be neighbors or let's say a difference of opinion between two companies, etc. Then you also go to an external body, court or something like that, and you ask them, we have a different opinion on a certain topic, transaction, or I don't know, about the garden between two neighbors, etc. And then you ask them, could you take care of this topic? And then this kind of independency of a certain body has a positive effect. The knowledge or the urgency to act was there. So everybody said, especially to the owners or to the founders, people on the work floor said, you have to act because of the radical transparency. Everybody knew how much cash we had, and they just saw, okay, the cash is going out of the company. You have to react. You have to lower the cost, and in a dramatic way. So there were people who said, okay, you have to act, although I know that probably I will be laid off. And then there was a team taking care of this, and then we had more or less let's say, two phases in which the layoffs were done. One was I would say the last in, first out round. That's a very classical one, which you have to negotiate with the authorities. And then in age groups, you have to lay off the last people who came in. That's a kind of fairness. So you're not going to lay off somebody who worked for the longest time at the company. No, you lay off in age groups people who started last.
Is
that
that
was
the
the first phase.
Is that the legal requirement, or?
Yeah, but it's in a lot of countries because they want to take care of the fact that a layoff round is not abused of getting rid of all their colleagues. Because you often have, let's say if somebody, I'm 55, if somebody's 55 and expensive, turnaround situation would be a very good chance of getting rid of all those old colleagues. And the longer somebody is in a company and the more difficult it would be for this person to find a new job, the more this position is secured in a lot of countries. So these are just actual legal requirements, and you have to discuss it with the authorities, and they check it and they say, okay, that's fine, and you have to prove that it's necessary, which is understandable because otherwise you wouldn't do any layoffs. And the second round was that we made an offer and said to people, okay, if you just reflect on, let's say, your own situation, how committed are you, or would you perhaps choose something else? And then perhaps some people said, for instance, I would have stayed a couple of years in the company, but I wouldn't. I mean, I like Viisi a lot, but I wouldn't have stayed here forever. So, and as I see myself that other colleagues are much more committed, I think it's fair that I then just take this responsibility to leave the company earlier than I would normally have done, to secure the jobs of my colleagues. And it was also openly discussed. And then people just stand up and say, okay, I take this opportunity, and then you take the offer, because I just see that other colleagues are just much more into Viisi and much more fighting for this than I am. And the interesting effect was, which we didn't know at that time, that, for instance, a lot of people also then found jobs at non-profit organizations. So they went to work for the government, for the city, for the province, for the national government, etc. So, or for big corporates who are less commercial. We are a startup. We have to fight for our revenues every month, every day. So a less commercial environment, which also showed in a way that let's say the toughest, most commercial people, which you need in a kind of recession time, because everything is about revenues. I think in the end the company become more commercial, stronger in that sense, perhaps also more, I wouldn't say classical sales, but also more focused on bottom line results, and people who had more roles supporting further development of the whole organizational structure, etc. Those people then chose, for instance, to leave the company and work at another organization. And the funny thing is that, or also rewarding thing is that then the turnaround went so fast, which we didn't know or couldn't expect. Then already in September, 2 younger colleagues who were laid off came back, which also says something about the culture, because they were laid off and they worked somewhere for half a year, and they said, no, Viisi was much better, and we were doing very well. And then 2 younger colleagues came back, and also another colleague will come back until the end of the year, which also says something that the way this whole turnaround was done in a very good and correct way. We didn't have any lawsuits, etc. We never had in any in our history. So yeah,
So
that really
so
worked out very well.
they reached out to see if the opportunity was now available again, or did somebody reach out to them to inform them? I'm just
There's still there are still a lot of communication with those ex-colleagues. So if somebody has a birthday party, for instance, they still invite their ex-colleagues.
okay.
Or they're in common WhatsApp groups, or they I don't know, they go for drinks or dancing together because they are also friends. I think it also had to do with the fact that because of the radical transparency, everybody knew about our financial situation, that there was not a discussion, has this to be done or not? Do they only do this because they want to earn more money? No, it was necessary for the existence of the company.
Yeah. How many people are you now?
I don't know exactly. I would say 33 or something like that.
Mhm. And when you were creating the company, did you know from the very beginning that you wanted this to be a self-managing company, or was there a transition at some point?
Yeah, we knew because we were working in a big corporate. I mean, if you work in a big corporate, you have a certain opinion about how things are done. So on the one hand, let's say I think if you start a company, every founder has a kind of idea. I will do this in a certain way, and I will do this in a different way than I experience myself, or I experience stuff which I found very good, and I'll do it the same, and other things I will do differently. So there was a kind of common understanding uh, to involve people in a more extreme way. We didn't have a clue at that time that it would be self-organization, and then we said, okay, when we are more than 10 or 12 people, we said, okay, the main reason for people to build new companies is that they don't want to be micromanaged. So if our company grows, why should we make the same mistake and also start to micromanage our people? Although one big motivation for us to be entrepreneurs is to be able to decide for ourselves. So if for the founders, it's a big motivational issue to decide for ourselves, we should also accept that for the people working in our company, it will be probably exactly the same. So, and then I started to search for models, etc., and then we ended up implementing Holacracy.
Okay. Can you tell me a bit more about those specific things that you saw? Okay, this doesn't work. I want it differently. Or maybe there were some things that like, okay, this did work. I'm gonna keep that in more kind of specific.
Okay, I mean a very very simple one is the one I just explained in a very profound way. That is, if you want to have acceptance, let's say for certain decisions, if it's especially if you talk for instance about turnaround, to my point of view, but that's my humble opinion. I think it really makes sense to share your financial data because you all we all know that, let's say, building companies, you have cycles and you will have difficult times. How do you involve people in difficult times when they're aware of the numbers and also about the cash in the company, for instance? So if you share this information or you start to share this information in good times, it will help you in bad times. That's one example. It was not shared in the companies I used to work for before. I mean, you saw then, I don't know, at the end, perhaps profit or whatsoever, but you didn't see cash flow or liquidity and this kind of stuff. So that was something we did differently. What did we do more or less the same? In the company we used to work for, there was also decentralized hiring. So you had a lot of local entities, and those teams, small units of, let's say, between 10 and 20 people, 10 and 20 advisors, they hire the people themselves. And I think that really works well. But I mean, that's not a common practice. But let's say in small companies, you often see this, that if you, let's say, if you have a painting company or something, let's say manual work, and you need somebody because you have more you have more clients than you can take care of. And then you also would say, is there somebody who knows somebody who also would like to join the company and paint or I don't know, repair cars, etc., etc. I mean, they are not calling an external executive search company to search for a painter or something like that. So I think that works pretty well. Why does it work pretty well? Because people who work somewhere, everybody knows people, and then people who already work somewhere really know if there would be a fit with somebody, with an external colleague or friend or whatsoever. But there is a kind of barrier because before you ask somebody you know to quit a job somewhere and to join our company, that's a very big burden. Because let's say if somebody wouldn't like Viisi, but has, let's say, resigned or quit another company, that's a huge responsibility. So that's a mechanism which it works very, very well. And the other thing is the other aspect is that if you have the autonomy to take a decision yourself in a team, you feel much more responsible for the decision you take. So the other way around would be HR tells you, Irena, we have found somebody for your team, but you're not allowed to decide yourself if you really like this colleague. Then you say, I didn't hire this person. Let's see if it's really a good fit. So if you have hired somebody and you have been responsible yourself, on the positive side, you will really prove that you have taken the right decision. So you will be really supportive, helping somebody to become a successful colleague. And on the other hand, if somebody, for instance, if in hindsight it would have been a bad decision, you also would feel responsible to solve this problem. So, and that's the more difficult situation, which we also have seen very, very often because it just belongs to building companies, that somebody then comes and says, Irena, I really don't understand. I had such an excellent impression of you in the application process. Why doesn't it work? What do you need from me? And then at a certain point, then if you, for instance, really struggle, then, and we already experienced this, and Irena would say, I like the company a lot. I like self-organization. I like radical transparency. I like your fixed salaries. I like your purpose. But to be really honest, and I'm talking about practical examples, I really don't know if I'm really interested in the product mortgage advice. So we had, and it was very interesting, when we became number one great place to work in the Netherlands, our fluctuation went up. So counterintuitive. And why did it go up? Because we had a lot of publicity and everybody said it's an excellent company and so human. And I mean, it's the best employer in this small segment. And then people just said, okay, I have to work there because I also want a really nice employer. I really want a human environment. I really want transparency. I really want to decide for myself. And then fluctuation went up. And then people just found out, to be honest, I'm just not interested in mortgages.
Okay, so they came with a company culture.
Yeah, they applied to the company culture and self-organization and all this beautiful human stuff, but they forgot that it's about advising people on their mortgage.
Yeah, interesting. So basically, when you started, it was holacracy from the beginning. I mean, like when you started growing to
after a couple of years. So let's say in the beginning, and that's more or less in every startup, it's more or less the same. As long as everybody can sit on the kitchen table, there's a lot of also organizational research done on this. But let's say until the number of 10 people discuss together every topic. There's also no functional specialization. So people sitting probably at the lunch table and then, I have this blah, blah, blah. And let's say you have a kind of common decision making on any topic. And everybody has an opinion about any topic, no matter what it is. And then in this next phase, you have to split. which is also difficult because if people are used to having an opinion on somebody else's work, people are not just stopping from one day to another. They still want to say, no, Reina, I'm not working in this field. I'm not working in media. I'm not working in the credit department. I'm not advising, but I think this or that, or I think you should do it, blah, blah, blah. Although perhaps the person is just not interested in your opinion. I mean, if he or she would be interested, she would just perhaps say, I'm not sure, or I'm just collecting different opinions. I'm curious, etc. But let's say as long as everybody fits on this kitchen table, you don't need, let's say, this organizational discussion about decentralization. But if you grow, then you have to split. And then the question is, now, how do you organize this? Do you organize this in a vertical way? And you still say, we are the founders. We want to have a kind of final saying on every topic. Or do you try to think further and say, okay, if you would go from 10 to 20 or from 20 to 100 or from 100 to 1,000, how do you want to organize this? Do you want to sign off any decision of 100 people? Or do you trust your people and do it the other way around? Because if you don't trust your people, perhaps you should think about the people you have hired.
Yeah. So when you faced this question, how did you decide on holacracy specifically?
Oh, it was very practical. So I found holacracy. Then I found somebody in the Netherlands who wrote a book about this. Netherlands is pretty advanced in this whole or decentralized decision making, because it also has to do with the Dutch way of thinking. Also from a historical point of view, it always have been. I mean, it's a side topic. The Dutch has a merchant tradition of a republican tradition of people governing together their cities. It's not a. I mean, it is a monarchy, but doesn't have a monarchy tradition. So it is citizens of the people. If you have, for instance, old Dutch paintings, you have a lot of citizens of the city, and they govern their city. That's the basic principle. Or if you'll have to build dikes against the water, you also have to do this together. So this kind of decentralized structure is there. Then I invited the author just to talk about this, and then we said, shall we just try it? And the basic principle also of this holacracy or decentralized decision making is it safe enough to try? And then you try it for a certain period, and then you evaluate and say, okay, do we like it? Shall we continue? Or do we dislike it a lot? And in the end, you can imagine people said, and you have always groups, people who are totally in favor, then you have people who are neutral, and then you have people who are skeptical. And they say, for instance, I find it much better just to be said what I have to do, than I don't have to think it for myself, or the responsibility is clear because it's my supervisor who has decided what to do. And is it wrong? If it was the wrong thing, then my supervisor is fault. Is his fault that I did this topic and not the other topic. But this process went very well, and then you have a kind of self-fulfilling, self-sustaining cycle. But the question is always, were there also people who didn't like it? Yeah. And what happens to them? And then we always said, okay, it's no problem. You can be skeptical. You shouldn't be, let's say, kind of a terrorist against this project. But for instance, we had somebody, a very young colleague, who said, because we skipped all ranks and titles, etc. Because it's very horizontal. And I said, I really like to have a new title every 2 years. It's like being in the army. You get a extra rank on your uniform. So if your idea of, let's say, also showing your rank is very important to you, then this model is not yours. I mean, if I would wear a suit and a tie and look like a bank manager, etc., and I find this very important to wear a tie, then Viisi is not the real place. I haven't worn a tie since years. And I find it more agreeable. But if somebody says, no, I like this idea of having new titles and new business cards, etc. And those people then, that was our experience. It was only a few, because I think those people also tend to work much more in big corporates with where this status is very important, because then you say I work for this big bank or for this big company.
Yeah.
But it was in the end it was not a real issue.
Okay. Were there any other challenges when you were implementing it?
In the beginning, it's just always underestimated how much work it is. So it's like learning a language. So if you would learn a language or swimming as a child, and you have been in the swimming pool twice, and say, I hate it because I still can't swim. Or you learn a sport, or a language is also a good example. But you have to practice. And something I also think is very underestimated is that you really need support, because it's something which doesn't just go automatically. But it's also, let's say, if you want to learn something, I mean, I don't know if you would be able to learn swimming yourself without a teacher. I don't know. I'm not an expert on swimming, but I think there's a lot of stuff. Or going to school, perhaps you could also teach yourself how to read and count, etc. But what is underestimated is you really need support, and you have to evaluate all the time the different steps with an external person. And I think in hindsight we should have even invested even more time in reflecting together with those people where you exactly are in this process.
So you used consultants, but now you wish you had spent even more time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, we are always put as an example for self-organization, and we have those 10 principles and no CEO and no business cards and radical transparency, etc. So we are also in this. I don't know if you know Corporate Rebels, one of those big icons, although we're a very small company next to Buurtzorg and other ones, etc. But I think one should stay very humble, and just compare it with teachers and learning to swim, etc. It's much more complicated, and everybody who says no, it's very simple, has, to my point of view, just not implemented it. And I think we are pretty advanced in a lot of topics, salaries and open salaries and equal pay and whatsoever. But all this stuff, where we do a lot of interviews and a lot of presentations, is really, really hard work. It takes an enormous amount of time, and all those topics are really, really are like a puzzle fitting together. So it's not, if you say, okay, radical transparency, I will just install radical transparency. No, it's not so easy just to take, let's say, one part you like out of the whole structure and they say, okay, let's just only implement this or that. That's not the way it works. Because if you, for instance, start with self-organization and you would, for instance, say, okay, let's give teams the responsibility to hire themselves, then somebody at a certain point will say, okay, but if we are allowed to decide on who to hire, why can't we decide on our budget? Or why can't we do this or that, or decide on, I don't know, other topics? So I think in the end, everything which looks easy from the outside, it's a little bit like watching good sportsmen. You see somebody playing excellent tennis, and you think, okay, you just have to push the ball over the net. But if you then if yourself on the tennis court, then you think, oh, it's much more difficult than I thought it looked like when I watch television or I watch the tennis play.
Yeah. Are there things that are not working so well now that you're still trying to figure out processes for or fine tune existing processes?
Yeah, what is still always an issue is this rotation principle. And it has two aspects. So if somebody is doing well, colleagues tend to say, Irena, you did a great job half year, just continue. Because why should you give a next person the same responsibility when everything works so well? And that's understandable. But in the long run, if you want to, let's say, raise the floor, which is called raise the floor, and the capacity and the experience of your whole team, then you should move on and say, okay, perhaps the colleague of Irena is less experienced, but we're doing well. I mean, you shouldn't give an unexperienced younger colleague a role if you go through times of crisis. Then that's also not fair. But if the company is doing well, you have to give people the possibility to gain this experience because you want to build a company. And if you hire new people, the more experienced people you have in the company, the better your whole structure is. That's one topic, but it's still difficult.
So people don't want to do it?
Pardon?
People don't always want to do it?
Yeah, that's the second aspect. It's often a combination of people who are, it's a little bit black and white, but people are, for instance, more introvert or less self-confident, and that can go together, but it doesn't have to go together. But it's kind of metrics. You have how confident are people, and introvert, extrovert. And if you have a combination of, let's say, being introvert and perhaps not very confident, then people say, it's not for me. I think you are much better in this. And then in a way you have to, force is not the right word, but you have to support this rotation principle. And then what often happens is that those people are doing an excellent job. And it's, let's say, to put it a little bit more practical way, let's say white, older men are very self-confident. So if you ask, for instance, men, male, do they think that they are better drivers than the average? Nearly all those men say, no, I'm best 10%, which is from a statistical point of view really difficult. And if you would have, say, a woman with, I'll take it a little bit, exaggerate a little bit, with a migration background and not, let's say, for instance, in the Netherlands, not or take English as an example, and not an Oxford English, but somewhere, I don't know, grown up, I don't know, in a totally different field, which is not so seen as very high educated, etc., which is no indication about intelligence or being able to play this role whatsoever. Then the woman would say, no, probably you're doing this much better. It's not my thing. I can't. So, but it's also what you see in general when women are promoted. They say, I don't know if I'm able to do this. Although they are in most cases. And the man says, no problem, I can take the new role. And exactly the opposite. So, and that's something where you have to be aware of. And that's also what you have to support as founders. And perhaps the third and last thing is that, especially if you are older and you are this white man like me, like 55, it's very important to keep distance. So, for instance, I live in Switzerland. The company is in the Netherlands. That's for private reasons. My family lives here. My wife has a good job in a big corporate. It's very good that I'm not there, because the tendency in both directions to ask, Tom, what's your opinion on this? Is not possible. They really have to plan a call with me, or the other way around. I hear something, and if I would hear a lot of stuff which is not my topic or not my role, I mean, if I don't hear it, I can't give a comment. If I hear a lot of stuff and people think, okay, I'm curious what Tom's opinion is because he's one of the founders, it's much better that I'm not there because you feel tempted to also give your opinion on stuff. So if you're not there, and that's also something which is a nice experience of sometimes where self-organization is installed, you have sometimes situations where founders or owners of companies become, let's say, ill. They spend 3 months in the hospital, and the first impression is, if I'm not there, the company doesn't work anymore. And then they come back and everything works fine. And then they think, okay, I thought I would be much more important. I would be essential for this company, and I'm not. And then some of those owners start to reflect on this and say, that's interesting. I was not there and it worked much better, and the people were perhaps happier. But it also has an aspect, if you're not there, or if you are not in this meeting, people are much more obliged to solve the problem together for themselves.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. What is your view on teal organizations?
Frederic Laloux, you mean?
Yeah. Like, what's your view? I'm gonna leave it broad.
Yeah, the problem with all those, let's say, labels like teal and holacracy and sociocracy and lean and kaizen, and it doesn't matter what labels you name. I give you a very simple and clear answer. You just have to practice yourself if you build a company, and just practice and just ask the people. So I would just say, forget about the labels. I mean, you can dive into them. I mean, I have enough books on the topic, but I think in the end is ask your people. Let's say, what are the 3 most important topics you want to change, and forget about the labels. And then perhaps you found out afterwards that some concepts are helpful, but don't try to over complicate or don't make things too scientific. I mean, I have a tendency to, somebody says something and say, okay, you have to read Laloux, or you should read this, or you should read that, or you should read Netflix founder. It's better, to my point of view. That's my experience. Just doesn't matter what context. What are the 3 main topics, or per team, what are the 3 main topics? And then just start from there. And then you evolve it, and then you will probably come up with certain stuff. And then, let's say, depending also on the company, let's say in this financial sector, perhaps people say we should be more purpose oriented because financial sector has such a bad name. We have to do something. So perhaps in the financial sector, that's something which will be on this list in the first 3 topics. If you work for Shell, and you would ask those people, what is the most important thing to do in an oil company? Perhaps a lot of young people say, if you have the different age groups, we should be more sustainable. And then sustainability would be a big topic. And then I don't know if in the end, let's say the organizational structure would just follow then afterwards. Or if you're in a crisis situation, people would say, for me, it's very difficult as long as I don't know anything about the numbers. I feel very insecure. And then radical transparency would perhaps the starting point.
Okay, so basically the frameworks are useful just as kind of tools that you can take and apply to the specific things that you want to solve in any given organization.
Yeah, the tool shouldn't be a purpose per se in for itself, and that's what often happens. So you have a kind of fashion all the time. So just take an example. You had a big crisis in whole manufacturing in the 70s, and then Toyota came up, and everybody was visiting Toyota, and everybody wanted to install Kaizen. And then the Americans took over and they made lean out of it with black belt, etc. I mean, the whole idea of securing employment, which is a basic fundament on the Kaizen, was lost, and then it was lean, and then and every time frame. If you would make a time frame, you can put a label on this time frame for certain periods of time. And now it was in this hype of scale up, it was hyper scaling. Grow as fast as you can. Profitability doesn't play any role. So every time has its certain labels, and people are felt so in love with certain labels that they forgot just to keep very close to their companies and just sit together and say, okay, what is the most important topic we want to solve together? Or do this anonymously. So, for instance, Great Place to Work, we discussed this morning. One of the big and good effects of Great Place to Work is that it's kind of survey where people have the absolute guarantee that they can just give feedback and nobody knows who has given this feedback. I find it, for instance, a very important mechanism. So that's why I find labels difficult. And then you are further, and then there's the next topic.
Yeah. Well, we just have 3 minutes left. Are there any final comments that you want to make? Maybe any advice that you would give to people who want to work in a self-managing way?
No, I don't really have anything to add. I will just stay humble, ask your people, try to do it together. The team is more important than the individual. See yourself as not so important. And it's also much more relaxing. That's also an aspect which is often forgotten. If you are a manager or if you are an owner or if you are a founder, your life is so much easier and so much more on an equal level. I mean, it's like, if you raise kids, do you want them stay them kids forever, or do you want to have an equal relationship? Do you want a horizontal relationship at a certain point, or do you want to be them that they should stay kids forever and just do what the parents, like you parents, tell them to do? I think that's not healthy, and I think it's also healthier for all those people who have a lot of power themselves to on a more horizontal basis, because it's much more efficient. You have much more time. I only have 3 meetings every week, fixed meetings. You don't have a lot of meetings. You can really work on the stuff you like. And also for your personal health and for your mental health is also much more relaxing, because not all the difficult stuff is delegated to the top.